While we're on this subject, I think it's kind of a natural transition to where my head is at with Paul, and the big question with him. There's a lot of stuff we could get into, but I think the natural extension of what we're talking about with Joel, with the load management and navigating the season, is how often is Paul going to get the same courtesy, and what are the downstream effects of that? Because when the Tim Bontemps story that we talked about recently, interviewing Joel and some of the other guys in camp, suggested in that story, Paul is going to be not on probably the same plan as Joel, but some of these games, it's going to be both of them at the same time. And how aggressive will they get with protecting Paul? So we're going to get our first example here, right? It's going to be fairly tight to make that regular season opener for Paul after suffering the bone bruise in the preseason game against Atlanta. And on the one hand, it's like, hey, it's the opener. You want to have the shiny new free agent ready to go to play next to, at the very least, Tyrese Maxey, hopefully him and Joel Embiid. But if team medical staff looks at it and says, hey, look, a couple more days, you'll go from, let's say it's like 15% risk to 0. Will they be aggressive about just like, yeah, we're not playing him tonight and we'll push off his debut until Friday? I don't know that yet. And that's something we're only really going to learn. Even if it's like setting aside that example, we'll only learn over the course of the season just how much they feel they need to protect Paul as he gets into his late 30s.
Look, if there is any way you can get that risk factor down to 0%, you do it. Game 1 is not inherently any more valuable than game 37, just because at the start of the season, he does not have to be out there on the floor if there is any kind of a risk. So I really hope they have the right perspective on that one.
Well, I mean, I look at it and we think about the Embiid part with the 15 back-to-backs and whether he's going to play 2 at one point and just decide to go out there and do so, and he plays the game. And I've been still trying to figure out what that number might look like. We don't think it's going to be the 65 because he'll also have just other load management days. But I am curious of what that may look like for Paul George, because at that 65 and talking about a potential number of him maybe missing, 17 games on the season after having played a decent amount for the Los Angeles Clippers last season. Is that something that they'll need? Does he get into a flow? And obviously now, if we don't know whether he's going to start the season or not, but if he doesn't, those would just be a couple of games that, of course, we have to scratch off right from the start. So I don't know what that looks like. But if the team is as good as we think it is, and as we talk about these players and what the rotation will look like a little bit later, and how Daryl Morey and Elton Brand have put together this really good roster, some of that stuff may not even matter once Nick Nurse gets a really good look at how they play. He's able to implement stuff, and it's not because of injury this season like it was a year ago. They had so many guys out when Nick Nurse was forced to play certain ways. When we talked about at the end of the season, how do we really evaluate Nick Nurse from a year ago? It was kind of tough because he had him beat out for a long period of time. Tyrese Maxey, broke his foot or whatever it was. Was it a broken foot?
Something sort of, I don't remember something along those lines.
Where he missed a significant amount of time, and then you make that trade and Robert Covington, all of a sudden, he's out. The Anthony Melton with the back issue, if they are able to get to relatively injury-free, just relatively, where guys are going to have little things that drop them from a lineup for maybe a week and drop them from a lineup for a game or two. But with the depth that they do have, and as we get into it here tonight, and Nick Nurse being able to understand what his lineups look like, I would hope that even missing Paul George or Joel Embiid for a game or two here and there, that they're in a good space. And based on how they try to manage it, depending on how they schedule it based on the actual schedule of games that they can sit against this particular team, this particular Charlotte. We always bring up those as examples, Charlotte's, Detroit's, and Washington's, and those types of games where you can sit those and still pick up a W, because you are going to have to play 4 games against New York, 4 games against Boston, because of your Atlantic Division opponent. Those are going to be tough. 3 against Cleveland, Indiana. Not that I know exactly how many they're playing right off the top, but you're going to play 3, at worst 3 against those teams during the regular season, where you're able to schedule it out based on who the opponent may be, where you can rest against certain ones and hope that you're healthy, relatively healthy enough to still go out there and put out a team that you think can go out there and compete. And that's what I think is going to be very important. And I don't know how many Paul George is going to miss based on all of that.
I will say this, as much as we could say, like, yeah, if you roll out Maxey and a mostly healthy team otherwise, you could definitely beat the Detroits, the Charlottes, the Brooklyns of the world. And I don't think there's a lot of inherent risk there. I do think like there does have to be some semblance of, you can't just like, we're only playing the full team against the Knicks or the Celtics or whoever, right? Like there's got to be rhythm. There's got to be working through your sets, your different defenses, right? Like you don't want to try to roll out a different zone look for the first time against a high level team, or you don't want to introduce a new series of plays for the first time against contenders only. So there does need to be a balance. It can't just be like I would say I generally agree with you, right? If you're going to try to, take games off, that those are the more obvious opportunities and save your bullets for, the best of the best of the best. But there does have to be some, caution about it just so you can build things in those games. And one thing I sort of agree with Doc Rivers, which there are not many of those, quite frankly, that idea of old school load management where, Joel might play 25 minutes and they blow the doors off somebody and you just pull them. I'm in favor of games like that, right? Where you get him out there, he gets cardio in, and everybody does, right? Not just Joel, but he's the most prominent example. They get reps, they get cardio, game fitness, all that. And then they get him out of there and they win by 25 points. That's basically the ideal NBA regular season game for these guys.
Yeah. And that's something they did such a good job in November, December, even early January last year. They were blowing teams out. Embiid wasn't playing in the fourth quarter, keeping his minutes down.
Still getting 30.
Yep. Still, well, yeah, including to the dismay of some when he was pursuing that streak. But
Me?
Yes. So hopefully they have enough firepower where they will blow some teams out and keep their minutes down. That's 100% a fair point.
We all silly like the mayor.